Alright, so we're going to begin. We started Hilchos Melicha Siman Ayin Gimel, which deals with Din Tzlias HaKoved, about roasting the liver. The liver is a very different kind of organ than the rest of the organs, and it's definitely not ordinary meat. So there's specific halachas to it. Just like there are specific halachas for the lave as well, the heart. We saw about the kachal. In Basar we learned a little bit about that. Various organs that have different issues with them. The kachal with the milk, the kavod with blood. This happens to be a very bloody organ, except that most of the blood is somewhat frozen, if we can say that. Frozen meaning that it's not fluid. And as a result of that, one drash on why the kavod is mutter if it's blood is because it says ala aretz tishbechena kamayim. It's a drash that the only blood that the Torah forbids is the kind of blood that flows. A frozen kind of blood is not really the kind of blood the Torah had in mind. So that's just one drasha. Otherwise, you have to say it's halacha l'moshe. We see now that this piece of organ, even though it's pretty much blood, is mutter, unless you're talking about the dam shepirish from the kavod. Dam shepirish min kavod is another story. Then it's dam shepirish, and dam shepirish we know forbidden. The question is on kavod if that dam shepirish is a dam that's also midoraisa, or if that dam shepirish min kavod is only also midrabanan. So on that we had various machlokes on how we hold. Some say it's the Raisa, the Toises, the Rashba, the Ran, the Rambam, and some say, like Rabbi Tam, the Rashal, that it's the Ramah, that it's this Dam Shepirish is also, but it's a Durabana. Nobody has any suffering about the Damasim Poinos, the dam which is found in the tubes, because that is a Dam Ba'in type of dam, which comes from the other parts of the animal, and it accumulates there, and it's not really Dam Hayivorim per se. So, as a result of the kavod having so much more dam than the usual piece of basar, the big machlokes among the Rishonim is not so much as a deraisa or derabana, which is also machlokes, but how do we kasher it? And you kasher it in the same way as we kasher other meat, melicha? Would it work? Would the melicha get out the blood? Or it's just too much blood. Melicha will not work on this. So, on that we have a machlokes. We have, of course, Rashi, that says, no. Rashi says, Melicha doesn't work on kavod. Your only option is tzli. Tzli, in other words, you have to roast it because of ribuy adam. And there are other Rishonim that hold like Rashi, the Rif, the Rambam, that Melicha will not do it. Rabbeinu Tam is one of the ones that holds that Melicha will help kavod just like it would help any other meat. And after you've done the Melicha, you can actually cook it in a pot. The Ramban and the Rashba hold b'di'evet like Rabbeinu Tam. No one pretty much holds like Rabbeinu Tam and the lechatchila. But b'di'evet, they rely on him. Even Rabbeinu Tam says that even though Melicha helps, you should not just do Melicha by itself, you should cut it up. Sheti va'erev. In both directions, you should cut up the kavod in order to allow the blood to flow freely. And then the cut portion, where you sliced it, you make it face down so the blood easily flows out. Even though the Rabbeinu Tam further adds that me'ikar adin, you can get away with not even doing Melicha at all if you cooked it by itself. That's how he learns the Gemara, that the basic suffix in the Gemara is legabe cooking the kavod with other meat. That's where it could possibly be a problem. That was where there was a suffix b'chlal. But if you were to just cook up the kavod by itself, kavod is mutter. In other words, me'ikar din kavod should not be a problem at all. You wouldn't even need melicha. Of course, he holds you do melicha anyway. Not only do you do melicha, you cut it up. But the question is, what happens if you cook that kavod with other meat? So of course, the Toises is one of the ones that holds over there that if you salted the kavod and it was cooked with other meat, then at least you saved the kavod. The other meat will still become asa. If the kavod was not even salted, then everything is asa. All right, that was the background. Halacha l'maaseh, the Shuchan Aruch doesn't really hold like Rabbeinu Tam, except that he says b'di'evet if it was cooked by itself. It doesn't say by cooking with others, but cooked by itself, b'kdeira, it's mutter. Akdero is asura. The pot is asur. Shepoletes veino bolas, we say. That's ligabe the covet. The evet mutum is basha levado bekdero, aber akdero asura. Shepoletes veino bolas. It will not absorb. V'yesh mishe oiser. And there is an opinion that says it's asur, and that's the minhag, as the Ramo points out, that we asur it even b'di'evet, even if it was salted before the cooking. And why do we have such a minhag to asur even b'di'evet by itself? Because there's a chashash that perhaps there is an opinion that holds that one has to be machmir on shluka. Shluka is a form of boiling the meat, boiling the food. And if shluka was done, it would be a problem. So since we're not bekim between the difference between what shluka is and what bishul is, therefore we asur it. Because there is one manda omer that says shalok would be asur. Alright, so because of that, the minhag is to asur, even if it was cooked by itself. We went on to explain that this cutting up the meat also has, there are various opinions as to why is there a need for it. Rashi says that the need for sheti ve'erev, the cutting up, was in order to properly do the tzliya, the roasting of the covered. In other words, it's understood from Rashi, even if you don't plan to cook it, you just plan to roasting, that is the proper way to do it. Tosis is the one that holds that that's only if you're going to cook it. That's why we need to do the cutting it up. Just in case there's a little bit of dam left over, it would be a problem with the cooking. In other words, the dam will come out. So in order to avoid that, you cut it up. Rabbeinu Tam is the one that holds that cutting up was only intended to do a proper melicha. You know, melicha according to him helps, so therefore in order to do the melicha, you also have to do the cutting up. Rambam has a unique shita. Cutting up has to do with chalita. We don't really do chalita. Chalita was singeing the blood or freezing it in place through a method called chalita, which also has to do with a certain temperature and I guess a quick way of putting it in and putting it out. Somehow that quick immersion into very boiling water singes or freezes the blood in place. That's called chalita. We'll talk a little bit more about it today and why chalita was done. But since we don't have that custom to do chalita anyway, if you were to just do tzli, l'chora, you wouldn't have to have kriya according to this opinion. Basically, the Mechaber says you do it anyway. You cut it up, especially if you're going to cook it. Later on in Sif Gimel, he says, even if you're not going to cook it, you're just going to do tzli by itself, there is an opinion that says that you should cut it up anyway. So I think the Kaf HaChaim says on Sif Gimel, which we'll get back to in a moment, that the reason, his way of understanding the Mechaber of why do cutting up anyway if you don't do tzli, he says, well, he didn't say tzli, he didn't say cutting it up sheti ve'erev in Sif Gimel, all he said is cutting it up a little bit. Why? Mishum dam shebasim poiners. There's some dam in the tubes, and that chaticha doesn't say sheti ve'erev, so it could be that just one small slice or cut would be sufficient in Sif Gimel according to the Mechaber. Since all you're doing is tzli anyway, and tzli, the fire, will take care of all the dam. I mean, you don't have to worry about dam being left over. So that was the basic reasoning behind cutting it up. As far as another method of cutting it, the Ramah is the one that mentioned that it's okay to make holes. Yeah, remember that? Iminakvo harbe, you can make holes with a fork, I guess. That would also be sufficient. And the Pri Chodesh says that that's the halacha. The Shach and others say that it's only b'di'evet, you should really cut it up. With the chicken, you don't really have to, cut it up so much, especially if you're going to put it on the barbecue. When you put it on the spit, you're making a big hole. So I think what it comes down to is how are you going to broil, or how are you going to roast, or how are you going to, take care of the liver. What is important, however, and everybody agrees on that pretty much, is that it should be on a surface which is slanted, where the blood can easily flow. Because there are chuvas, and I didn't mention it last time, that hold that why you would be able to put it in the broiler pan, according to one opinion. Why? Because even though you don't do melicha that way, on a flat surface, even though you're not allowed to do melicha in a kli she'eino menukaf, the blood has to have a place where to go. And if there's no holes in the kli, It's going to sit in some blood, it's going to go back in with the salt. So we are makbid in regular melicha that it should be slanted, it should be a klimenukav and so forth, but there are opinions, believe it or not, and it's good to know they exist, in case something happens with the Yevet, that if you're roasting liver on a flat surface, like on a broiler pan, it would be okay. Why? Because the fire of the tzli is different than melicha. The fire of the tzli that's going on here is so hot that it burns up any blood that's dripping down. We don't hold like that. The Maisa, we're machmir. Nobody should broil their liver in the broiler pan. Even though everybody would agree it does reach the temperature that is required, which is, by the way, another shaila, how much of a temperature do you need? If you're not doing it as a barbecue, you're doing it in a broiler. There's even a question where garuf and kotum would be sufficient to broil a liver. Garuf and kotum is the concept that we use in Shabbos, where you don't have the coals anymore present in the oven, but it's still very, very hot. You can warm up food. You can definitely keep food warm. You may be able to cook something else because it's very intense, the heat. You just remove the coals or you covered it, right? That's what a blech is. So think about it. Can you cook something on top of a blech which is directly sitting in the flame? I think you could. Even if it's in a low flame, after a while. I think after a while, it may take longer, right?
It depends what you're cooking.
Depends what you're cooking.
Some things are easy.
Right. So that's the question about
That's one of the problems with the that it will cook.
With the water?
They made a blech.
They made a blech?
Made a
Water?
thin flat plate.
Right.
You put water in.
I guess I may have seen it, but I don't
Selling
recall.
for a while.
I don't recall it, but I may have heard about it, or maybe.
What's the why
Right.
water?
Oh, it's very hot. Ultimately, it's not hermetically. The water inside will ultimately boil out. It gets inside.
And therefore,
What you put on top of is almost like putting it on, because it's going from the fire through
water.
metal, very hot water, then in your pot.
So that's hotter than just plain blech, plain piece
Oh,
of.
much hotter.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
I won't say it will cook, but it will come. You cannot touch
And,
that.
and the preference for that will be to keep the food even warmer, even hotter?
It will keep it hot.
I don't think the idea would be just.
I had
Yeah.
personal experience with it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
that logically speaking, the purpose of the whole blech. 'Cause if you
That's
have a
inter-
blech
that's an
on
interesting
one
point.
place and you have a fire under it, that place will be hot,
And
as
the
you-
rest
as-
will not be as
as
hot. Sure.
Right. But if you have water in, but since the water
Interesting.
spreads the
The
heat,
water though will ultimately boil out.
That can be.
That water is getting
Oh, sure. So
it
it's
might not have been the
way beyond
purpose.
Yatzalet.
right.
That was
Way
what-
beyond water.
That was why it was taken off the market,
I don't know if it's off the market. I know there are Rabbanim who have said not.
because of the boiling water.
No, the water is put it up before Shabbos. It's
I'm
not-
just saying, no, because the water gets a lot
Because it gets so hot.
And what shows you that it's
What,
hot
and
is
therefore the
boiling water.
problem would be at the edge. Not a, see, you're allowed to put before Shabbos, that is, you're allowed to put on top of the flame. In other words, blech covers the flame and covers another part of the stove. Before Shabbos, you put your food on top of the spot above the flame. That's perfectly fine, even if it's going to be Yatzei Ledes boy. Okay?
You're putting the food on before Shabbos.
Before Shabbos. The problem will be only on Shabbos.
Shabbos, yeah.
On a spot where it could become Yatzei Ledes.
The whole spot.
So, like Elon was saying, it's a very good point. With water in there, it would spread out evenly the heat. Very interesting, could be. Plus,
What is
like
such
you
a
said, it
thing
would get even hotter.
Yeah.
So it's two problems here.
What is such a thing called?
Sure. Yeah.
A special
It
name?
was sold as a blech.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So as far as making holes, it appears to be that some say that it would be perfectly okay to make holes in lieu of cutting up the liver. At least there should be some sort of chituk in order to help the tzli, especially if you're going to cook it afterwards. The Rama also brought the example, if you took out the mora, the gallbladder, together with the kaved, by pulling it all out together, that's a form of chituk as well. Because that will allow the dam to flow from the place where it was cut off. In the Taz, there's a chiluk between the kaved, the liver of a chicken, the liver of an animal. Yeah. Okay. So that was Sif Aleph, pretty much. In Sif Beis, the Mechaber says, "In cholto bechometz o beroischin benikev vehoitzi mizraki adam shebesoich min adin mutar levashloi." So I think we basically went quickly through it, that if you do chalita with vinegar or with the boiling water, and you perforated it and took out all the tubes of blood in it, minadin, you should be able to cook it afterwards, but the Goinim prohibited to do so. We're not bekim in this, but the evidence mutter. Now, but the evidence, he's assuming you know what you're doing. So what's chalita exactly? Now, there's two kinds of chalita. One was with vinegar and one was with boiling water. And what that would produce would be a freezing of sorts. It would dry up the blood on the spot. And then the question is, what are you going to do with that meat now? In other words, what's the whole purpose of chalita? If you want a little bit more of an elaboration of how or when it was done, I would ask you to look at Siman Samach Zayin if you ever have a chance. And in Samach Zayin, of course, you have halachas about dam, blood, not necessarily melicha. And over there, it mentions this whole concept, a little bit more detail, more examples. In the Gemara, you find a concept called umtzo, chozelele umtzo. There are people, believe it or not, that would eat raw meat occasionally, and they wouldn't mind. Raw meat, just like the sushi, they say is raw fish, raw meat. Now, even though most people don't like raw meat, occasionally it may be, possible. We don't have a problem with that according to Jewish law, because there's no dam shepirish. Take that piece of meat and cook it without melicha, you have a problem of dam shepirish, which is what we discussed in the beginning of Hilchas Melicha. So technically, raw meat has no dam shepirish. However, once you start biting the meat, you're going to have blood flowing. When you're biting it, that's going to become dam shepirish. You hear? Yeah. Take a bite. You take a bite, you're going to have dam shepirish. So what did they do? They would make chalita. And the chalita, one form of chalita was in vinegar. Somehow that putting it in vinegar, and I'm not sure how long, but it wasn't for too long, it would somehow freeze or singe that blood in place. That blood is not moving anywhere if you eat it raw. So the question is, there's still a question, whether what was intended with this was to avoid melicha altogether, like the Torah, I believe, says, that if you wanted now to go ahead and cook it, you don't have to do melicha anymore. Was that an alternative to melicha? Or was it just intended if you plan to eat it raw, but if you changed your mind and now want to cook that piece of meat, you still have to do melicha? Okay. That's just a little bit of the background as why chalita was done. Either it was as an alternative, which not everybody agrees. I think the consensus basically is it was a form of a way of eating, allowing you to eat a piece of meat without having to worry about dam, if you eat it raw. Once you want to cook it, that's a separate story. So therefore, here, the Mechaber seems to be saying, he holds like the B'di'evet, complete B'di'evet, that if you really did it right, with the koved, here he's talking about koved only. It's mutter. Now, what he means, therefore, that it was cooked without melicha. And we mentioned last time that for some reason the Ramah does not argue on this. He has no comment on this, which is interesting. And the Shach, of course, notices this, and he brings the Torah's Chatas, which says, in the Torah's Chatas he writes, that even b'di'evet it's asur. If that's the case, then why don't you say so? Here, the Ramah. The only Torah's Chatas you say that it's asur, what about here? So the Shach says that what's strange, even more than that, is that in Siman Samach Zayin, where it says it's mutter lachloit basar b'choimetz basar, regular meat, over there the Ramah says that even though we're not bekin to do this, that's lechatchila, but the ever it's mutter. Wow. So the Shach says, you know what? Not only do I have a problem that the Ramah doesn't say anything here, in Torah's Chatas it says b'di'evet it's also, and in Samach Zayin it says b'di'evet it's mutter. That's a big question on this, on the Ramah. No, the Ramah, it's the same thing. In Torah's Chatas is Ramah, right? So here he doesn't make a comment, where in the Torah's Chatas he did. Okay, you have something to say right here. Next question is, wait a minute, okay, it's also b'di'evet, then why did you say it's mutter b'di'evet? In Samach Zayin, when you're talking about chalita, basar, over there it's basar, granted it's not covered. Perhaps, is there a difference between basar and covered? So the Shach on this gives two explanations. Why does he say over there it's mutter, and here, if anything, he says it's asur? So he wants to say that perhaps liver is worse than basar. It has much more blood. Chalita does not help. B'di'evet. I'm sorry, lechatchila. And b'di'evet. In other words, you can't use chalita for covered, according to the Ramah. Or, this could be this is an interesting explanation. The second explanation, I think several achronim subscribe to it, if I recall. The kavanah of the Ramah is the chalita doesn't hurt. In other words, that if you did chalita, and now you want to cook it, you still could do melicha. So even though over there it says it's okay, it never was intended that it's okay just by itself. It's okay, now you can still do melicha. In other words, the chalita did not damage the basar. You know, if you pour boiling hot water on a chicken to be able to remove the feathers, it may be a problem for melicha later. Boiling water, I mean, you're cooking it already. Remember that we spoke about it. So hot water could be a problem. No, chalita in chometz, you did it? Yeah, it's not enough. But it won't hurt. If you want to do melicha, you can still go ahead and do melicha.
So it's typically said bechat and chometz.
Oh. Well, over there it said chometz. Over there it's talking about chalita and chometz, yeah. No, meat and liver.
No, because the chicken with the boiling water because...
No, that was just my example. My example of using that.
But for regular meat, that would be...
Regular meat, you don't want, you don't have a reason to pour boiling water unless you're defrosting it. Remember we spoke about that too.
So
you want to defrost it, and then you have to be careful not to defrost it with boiling water for the same reasons. You don't want to pour boiling water on a chicken's feathers to help you remove the feathers. You know, lukewarm water, okay, but not boiling water. It's going to be a problem. So the Shach explains chalita will not damage the one's ability to do melicha afterwards. Now, even after chalita, you can be moleach the basar, and they never intended to say that chalita will help without melicha.
So that will be in Torah's chatas.
No, in the Ramah over there, the Ramah Samach Zayin, the Ramah actually says. He says it's okay.
On the meat, because as you're saying, the meat, it doesn't make it rim.
Yeah, so the Shach explains what the Ramah really means there. Even though there are some Meforshim, I don't remember who it was. There is one poisik, maybe even a Chavis Das, but don't quote me, who says, you know what, but the evidence if somebody did chalita over there and no melicha, it's okay because the Ramah didn't specify about anything about it. He says plain the words chalita. So he takes it at face value, whereas the Shach is a little more careful. He says, you know what, here he says it's asur, there he says it's mutter b'di'evet. It's possible though what was intended was there, that not that it's mutter completely without melicha, it's just that if you did it, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't destroy the meat. I mean, it is reading into it a little bit. It is an interpretation. The Ramah doesn't say that. It is a little forced, right? And that's why others will say, you know what? But the evidence still, you might be able to get away with it. You may have other places who to rely
without salt.
Without salting, but still b'di'evet.
Because according to the Shah, you could salt it.
Yeah.
So those other people are more lenient than the Shah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, b'di'evet only. Yeah. In other words, we don't hold that.
What is the b'di'evet by here? The b'di'evet is after you did the chalita, b'di'evet is after you already
after it was already
salted.
cooked. Yeah, without salted. Yeah.
So the achila, if you did the chalita b'di'evet after, you shouldn't do chalita. You did the chalita b'di'evet, you should salt it.
If you want to cook it. If you want to eat it raw, you don't have to salt it.
No,
remember we talked about the why would somebody do chalita? Because he wants to eat a raw piece of meat. So he doesn't want to have basar, doesn't want to have the dam coming out. So the chalita b'chometz hopefully would help him. So there the Chabad speaks about what happens if the meat got red. You can't do chalita. I mean, you can't. In other words, there's a way to know if your chalita helped you or not, if it did anything or not. So we're not bekim today. So I don't think anybody does chalita, except for he was telling me what the Yemenites do. But that's the Shach's explanation of the Ramah. Why there he says it's okay, but the here he says it's not. Either because covered is worse than basar, covered has more dam, or because all he meant was that you can still do melicha. And Lemaisa, there is no difference between basar and covered. On both, the chalita will not damage it, will not make anything worse. That was Sif Beis. In Sif Gimel, we went briefly through the scenario where all one wants to do is do sli and not bish. All one wants to do is roast the covet, which according to some opinions that's really the only way to deal with it. And in reality, as we will soon see, the minig is not to salt. You don't even need to salt it at all, except a little bit. But Litzli, the Mechaber, for some reason here says, sorry, chaticha, you still, even though you're not going to cook it, you need a little bit of a cutting it up. Yishum dam shebasim poinus. And he tells you why. There's still there may be some dam of the simpoinus in the tubes. If you did not cut it up a little bit, koidem sliya, before the tzli, you can do it, you can still do it afterwards. That's the Ramah. If all you're doing is roasting it, like today, we follow the Ramah, you don't really have to do anything. Because the fire of the tzli will be shoyev, all the dam. It'll be hot enough to draw out all the blood. The blood is going to, of course, go running down, and you don't have to worry. But as long as, of course, you did enough of a tzli. When it comes to tzli, you don't do it rare. Right? You're going to do it, as we said last time, either a half or until it becomes dry. You have to pretty much determine that the dam is gone. And that takes a little bit of experience. So therefore, the Mechaber is a little bit machmir. As we mentioned, the Kaf HaChaim seems to say that it's only a small chumrah, that it doesn't require sheti ve'erev here. And the chituch, all he requires is a little bit of a chituch, since all you're doing is sleep. Cut it up a little bit. But the Ramah says, no, our minig is afilu lechatchila, you don't need anything if all you're doing is sleep. Alright, in the Siv Daled, actually before we go to Siv Daled, the Makor of the Halacha, the Gabet Sli, is the Ri and the Bahag. Bahag is the one that says that even for Tzli alone you need chituch. And that's how the Shuchan Aruch here paskins, because of the Damasim Poinas. And the Ri says that only if your kavanah is to cook it do you need cutting it up. Otherwise you don't need it. And the reason for the chituch is because the dam of the kaved atzmoy, not the simpoinus necessarily. Anyway, as we said before, the Kaf HaChaim says a small cut should do it. Alright, in Sif Daled, we see a concern about roasting meat and kaved at the same time. The ovens back then were different than the ovens today. The ovens back then had the opening from the top. The ovens today, for the most part, we have the opening on the side of the oven. As a result of that, the way you stick in the spit, I guess it's called, on where you're going to put the meat and liver to roast. Remember, we're not putting it flat on a tray or anything. We'll be putting it inside with a rod, with a piece of metal. It's going to be going this way, versus from the top, it's going to be hanging down. Different way of putting in the meat into the oven. So there was a concern.
With respect to from top to bottom.
Yeah. That's where there's
vertical rather than horizontal.
Yeah, we will see why. If you went ahead and roasted, barbecued, the covered with meat in the type of oven that they used to do in the time of the Chachmei Gemara, shepihem lemalo, that their mouth, their opening is on top, what may happen in the end is yia kovet lemato. What should be the way to do it properly, since you're using those kinds of oven, is make sure that the kovet is lower than the basar. Yia kovet lemato velo lemalo. You don't want the blood of the liver to drip on the basar, on the meat that's beneath it. So therefore, you want the liver to be at the bottom. All right. Then what? If you did it that way, you're safe. If you had the covet first, and on top of it you have the basar, no problem. The basar can drip on the covet.
Do they need to be the same spit?
Yeah, they're separated a little bit, right? But are we concerned about the blood dripping on the other one? In the end, we're not concerned. Either way, even if you had the cover on top, because something called mishrik shorik. Blood, mishrik shorik. What's the word in English? Ilan mishrik shorik. It just basically, it's slippery. It slips off. So there is an opinion that they wanted to say kibole kach poltoi. But the reason kibole kach poltoi, which we're very familiar with, is not used in this scenario is only because the ribui hadam in the covet, there's so much blood there that we don't want to say kibole kach poltoi. It wouldn't really work. So therefore, the term that's being used in a bediavad situation, if you nonetheless put the covet on top, it's dam mishrik sharik. Don't worry, it slips off. The fire will burn it all up. b'di'evet. But lechatchila, we are concerned. We don't want all that blood going into the basar, because even if it doesn't, it looks like it is. And that Gemara that mentions this, it mentions also the same halacha legabe kachal. You don't want the milk, any milk, residue of milk in the kachal, dripping on top of the meat. Even though it's all going to be burned up, it looks like it's going in. It doesn't look good. So lechatchila, the Mechaber says, if you did it like this, yeh kovet lemata v'lo lemala. But di'evet, it's mutter. Why? Dam mishrik shorik. But b'shipudim shetzolim etzel ha'eish, with our situations where we have shipudim that you roast by the fire, also litzloison im habasar lechatchila afilu kovet lemata. Even in our situation, if you're using that same kind of spit, you cannot do it at all. Don't do it together with basar, even if the covet is lemata. What does covet lemata in this case mean? That the covet is the one at the edge of the metal, and the basar is the one on the top. Right? Lemata means, right? Whatever. Why not? Because when you're putting it horizontally, as opposed to vertically coming down from above, you may do this or that. You may lift it this way or may lower it this way, and as a result of that, you may get one on top of the other. So even though you had the covet in the right position at the bottom, but because of the way the oven is shaped, and you're going to be putting it sideways versus putting it from the top, if you're putting it from the top, it's always going to remain the one that's at the bottom at the bottom. If the opening is from the side, you may do this. In other words, it may come to be on top instead of being at the bottom. That's the only concern here. That's what it says. With our shiputim shetzolim etzel ha'eish also litzlosim mabasar together lechatchila afilu kovet lemata. All right. So that's what lechatchila we don't do it. We don't put them at the same time meat with liver. In such a situation where you can have it that
two
horizontal. Yeah, if you have a big oven, obviously. Yeah, obviously. Wherever there's no concern that one is going to be on top of the other, you could do it. Sure. Here the concern is it may, by shifting it around, it may shift position too. And then the covet is going to start dripping on the meat. And you don't want that. But the di'evet, it's okay. This is only lechatchila din. Comes along the Ramah and says, you know what? You have an advantage in nimlecha kovet kvar. If you happen to have salted the liver before, you salted it. So kvar muter letzloisim basar. Then you could go ahead and do it lechatchila, even roast it with meat. Why? Afilu al gabe bisur, even if you put it on top of the meat, because through the melicha that you did to the kovet kvar nismae domoi, there is less blood in that liver now. They have a kibasar al gabe basar. Then it's just like meat on top of another meat. But that is a little bit of a question on this. But you understand, the Ramah says simple. You have an advantage. If you did salt that liver, there is an advantage that you can possibly, go ahead and roast the two together, because then it's like basar and basar. So what exactly is the Ramah saying?
Then if that's why he holds it,
Yeah.
okay, even the di'evet, even Melicha,
Right.
this meat's like the other meat. Then why does he, previously you said, I got you right, you cooked it in a pot with other meat. Even if it's awesome. It seems to be a steal.
Oh, very good. Very good observation. Even though between me and you, a pot is definitely more serious than an open fire.
Right, but if it's Melicha, it's the same, then...
Oh, very good. That's the task question. Very good. So that's where we headed. Nice Ramah that tells us we have an advantage. You did melicha to the covet. Comes along the Taz and says, but wait a minute. How could you roast a covet that was salted with the basar shelo nimlach? According to Rabbeinu Tam, remember Rabbeinu Tam? According to Rabbeinu Tam, the melicha of the covet, what did the melicha do to the covet? It actually helped get out all the blood. According to Rabbeinu Tam, melicha helps covet just like it helps basar. Okay, so now let's assume you have Basar roasting on top of covered. On top of this covered. Not the covered on top, but Basar on top of covered. But this is a covered that was nimlach, right? And covered that's nimlach means that all the blood is gone. And we're going to see later on, you have to be careful with, you can't salt a piece of meat on top of meat that has already been salted. Remember that?
Sure.
If the covered's already been salted, and now you have basar which the blood is dripping on top of this covered,
So
it's going to absorb it.
So this is not salted in it.
No, the meat was not salted. No.
It was roasted without being
So the question is similar to where you're headed, is that if you hold like Rabbeinu Tam, that the Melicha accomplished what it usually accomplishes with Basar, that it got all the dam out, you would have a problem even if the Basar is on top of the covered. Okay, he's attacking it from a different angle than you are in a sense, but it's the same idea. If you hold Melicha help, you have a problem from a different angle. Is that even if you put the Basar on top, you're not allowed to do that. Lechatchila, if this is completely without any blood. We're concerned now that the dam of the Basar is going to answer the covered. Now, the Pri Megadim on this Taz explains that the Taz meant this all in a lechatchila. But the Evan, we all pretty much agree that the fire is going to burn everything up. But this is only in a lechatchila. Why should we be able to do that? So it's like you're saying, if the Melicha really helps, which is like Rabbeinu Tam, then on the one hand, we shouldn't have a problem with the covered, in other words. If it's on top, it wouldn't be a problem. But we will have a problem the other way around, if you put the covered in the bottom. In other words, if you hold Melicha helps, it's a big question here. How do you put the two together? In other words, either why not put the two together? Why not put the covered on top, just like you said, why not? Just like in a car, it would be okay. According to Toises, one second. According to the ones who say it's mutter, whatever. One second. We said, which point did you raise? Legabe, which one? Because that was only Rabbeinu Tam said that it would be okay. Rabbeinu Tam said it was mutter.
Because once it's
Here was up.
The what?
Rabbeinu Tam said it was mutter because of any other loss.
Right, that was the covenant itself, yeah. And so you're talking about according to that opinion, right?
According to that opinion.
Right, okay, fine, yeah.
Also that holds what you can't
Yeah, because there are other opinions who hold that the covenant is fine, but other Basar is not, yeah. But you're saying according to the opinion that holds that the Melicha helped, if it does help, then it shouldn't be a problem. In the same way, in other words, that in the Kedera, it's not a problem, then here it should not be a problem, right? Yeah. And whereas the Taz says, in addition to that, if anything, it would be that we would have a different problem. That if the covered is at the bottom, it may become aser from the blood of the meat, which is again another problem, another issue, but based on the same reasoning that if the Melicha helped, then the status of this covered is very, very different. Either way, the question is a valid question. Comes along the shach and brings down. That ultimately, I think this is based on Toises, that ultimately what does help here is Kebola Kachpoltoi. Kebola Kachpoltoi, as you know, is a more powerful explanation than Dam Mishrak Shorik. What you're saying is that even if it is absorbed, it will come out. Rabbeinu Tam, he says, the poskim here would be holding not like Rabbeinu Tam, that the Melicha actually did not help. That's what he's saying. So the Shach, in answer to our question, is saying, we have to say, like Toises, in other words, like the poskim, we hold like Toises that Keboloi Kachpoltoi, and as far as the Rabbeinu Tam, the Melicha completely took out the blood, no. We would hold like the poskim that say it did not help. And if you hold like that it did not help, then that would make sense why it would be okay. But to that, the Ramah does say that a little bit it does help. A little bit, mutter letzoyse basar, the kvar nismai domoy. And then it's equivalent to Basar al Gabe Basar. And I'm looking at the Shach now. It says Mashma the Kol Shekin Tute Basar. If it would be, obviously, the more so if it's beneath the Basar. V'chein Mashma b'toises. Yeah, I'm looking here at the Beraheitiv. It says in Halacha, the meaning of the oilam is sheloi litzos covered in Basar anyway, not to do them both together. Lo tachas bisor, velo ilui bisor, not on top, not at the bottom, lo benimlach, velo belo nimlach, whether it was salted or not. Yeah, but according to the Shach, based on what Tosfos says, that the time is kebolokach polto, you would be able to be toilet them together, because we go with the poskim that our cholik and Rabbeinu Tam that the Melicha did not help. So if it did not help, that means you're back to square one. Yeah, that's all it is. Yeah. Okay, in Sif Hey, real quickly, don't salt liver together, or I should say on top of the meat, elotachtov. If you ever, it's mutter. Says on that says the Ramah. By the way, the reason why we don't do it together is from the same din in the Gemara that you don't roast them together, lechatchila, covered on top of basar. The Ramah nevertheless brings the minne v'nagu shelo limloach covered klal afilu levadoy. We don't salt liver at all, even by itself. Ve'ein l'shanois. Don't change this minne grakesh lemolchu tzas. Just put a little bit of salt on top, when it's in the spit, or munachas ala ish, or if it's already directly on the fire, it's loiso. Mihu, im isa shemolach koved, ben shemolcho levadoy, or im basar, afilo al gabi bisakol motor. But if it had happened that you did salt covered, whether you salted it by itself or you salted it with the basar, even if it was on top of the basar, everything is mutter. Some say sheyesh liklof me'at saviv covered im hidvuka ba'oif. If you salted it all together, the liver was still attached to the chicken. You should peel a little bit around the chicken where it was attached. That's only a chumrah. So what's the reason why not to salt liver at all? Except for the little bit, I should say. Why not salt the liver? So the Shach brings down two reasons. One is B'Shema Ma'aril, that sometimes the fire of the tzlik possibly could be mavliya back the little dam that came out from the salt. But that's only a small chashash. The second explanation, however, is the Beis Yosef brings down, is that the whole idea of why we have such a minhag of not salting the liver is that people should not make a mistake of cooking the covet after the melicha without sliya. They say, oh, I just salted the liver. Let me go ahead and cook it. People will forget, well, this is liver, this is not meat. So in order that there should be a heker, we don't salt liver. We don't salt it the way we salt meat, that is. So that there should be a heker. And you might eventually even cook it with other meat. And then that other meat will become usher, of course. And finally, the Ramah just adds one more minhag, and that is Yore Deah kol koved achad sliyoso. The minhag is to rinse every koved after it was roasted, mishum dam adavavu, because of the little bit of dam that still may be on it. Miu im lo hedicho muteris. If you did not make any hadocha, it's muteris. So the Shach says, the Ramah told us this already in Sif Aleph. If you remember, it says, when you're coming to cooking, and after it's go ahead and rinse it after the tzliya before you cook it. If you did not do hadocha and you cooked it like that, it's mutter. He told us that in Sif Aleph. What is he adding over here? That you have to do it even though you're not going to do bishul? That's what some want to say. Even though you're not going to do bishul, there is a minute to always rinse it off the little bit of salt and make it contain some blood. But the Shach is very interesting. The Shach says, you know what the chiddush here in the Ramah doesn't just repeat himself. The Ramah actually wants to say that it's even mutter if you did not do hadocha before tzliya. Remember how that hadocha is important for meat? So you went ahead and put a little bit of salt on this piece of meat, on a piece of liver, and then you got it ready for tzliya. Now you want to make sure, and we'll see it later on, you don't want to have this this kavod sitting in a little bit of salt for too long. As soon as you sprinkled a little bit of salt on the liver, which is our meneg, go ahead immediately and roast it. So the chiddush that the Ramah is saying is that even though I told you in Sif Aleph to rinse it off after you did the tzli, whether you're going to do bishul or not, the Shach says, here the chiddush is that even if you did not do another kind of hadacha, the hadacha that comes before the tzli, just like you have hadacha for the basar, you have the hadacha for the kavod, you're supposed to rinse it off. This hadacha, if you did not do by kavod, is not the end of the world. Why? Because the fire is going to remove anything anyway. I mean, that's really the explanation of why it works. With meat, you better have hadacha. You want to soften it. You want to remove the dan ba'ein. So, of course, you want to do hadacha here before you do tzli. But in case you did not, that's the chiddush the Shach is saying in the Ramah, that even the first hadacha before the tzli, if that was not done, it's okay as well. All right, Mitzvah Hashem, the last Sif Siva we'll do Mitzvah Hashem after Shavuos B'Tammuz.